The taste of stale coffee clung to my tongue, a bitter companion to the dust motes dancing in the weak morning light. I watched them drift, aimless, much like my own days since the city had shed me. The badge, once a weight of purpose, now just a phantom ache beneath my collarbone. My apartment, a testament to a life paused, offered little comfort beyond its quiet indifference. The newspaper lay splayed across the scarred kitchen table, its headlines a dull roar I usually ignored. Today, however, a particular photograph snagged my gaze, pulling me from the quiet eddy of my self-imposed exile. A cargo plane, on an abandoned runway. The image was grainy, captured from a distance, yet the stark outline of the hulking aircraft against a bruised dawn sky struck a chord, a dissonant note in the symphony of my carefully constructed apathy. My fingers, still stained with yesterday's ink from a half-finished crossword, trembled slightly as I reached for the paper. The accompanying article spoke of a meticulously planned heist, a brazen theft of high-value cargo electronics. The brief paragraph stated, vanished without a trace. No forced entry, no alarms tripped, just an empty hold where millions once lay. My breath hitched. The details, sparse as they were, painted a familiar picture, one etched into the deeper crevices of my memory like a morbid fresco. The precision, the surgical removal of assets, the ghost-like disappearance. It was the phantom signature, a calling card I knew all too well. A cold dread, a sensation I'd thought long buried, began to unfurl in my gut, coiling around my resolve. I remembered the last time I'd felt it, a gnawing certainty that had been dismissed, then mocked, then ultimately proven devastatingly true. I pushed away from the table, the chair scraping a protest across the linoleum. My mind, a quiet pool for years, now churned with a sudden violent current. I needed to see it. Not the official reports filtered and sanitized, but the raw, unvarnished truth of the scene itself. I needed to breathe the air where it had happened, to feel the lingering echo of his presence. The drive was a blur of urban sprawl giving way to forgotten fringes. The city's pulse receded, replaced by the whispering wind through skeletal trees and the distant hum of power lines. The road narrowed, cracked asphalt giving way to gravel, until the familiar, desolate expanse of the old municipal airfield stretched before me. Beyond the crumbling chain-link fence, the silhouette of the cargo plane on an abandoned runway loomed, a vast, silent monument to industrial decay. Yellow tape, a vivid slash against the muted landscape, fluttered in the breeze, guarding the perimeter. I parked my battered sedan a discreet distance away, its engine ticking softly as it cooled. A uniformed patrol officer, young and with a nervous energy that belied his stern expression, blocked my path. "Can't go past here, sir. Active scene." I met his gaze, my own eyes I knew carrying the weight of too many sleepless nights. "I'm Cole, used to be with the department." He squinted, a flicker of recognition or perhaps just curiosity in his eyes. "Former Detective Cole, heard about you." The words were neutral, but the unspoken judgment hung in the air, a stale taste of my past. "Just curious," I said, a lie so thin it barely covered the tremor in my voice. "The details in the morning paper, they sound familiar." He hesitated, then glanced over his shoulder toward a knot of investigators near the aircraft's ramp. "Nothing to see here, sir. Just a professional job, very clean." Clean. The word scraped against my nerves. That was his hallmark. A specific knot, perhaps, or a single, unusual item, carefully placed. The officer's brow furrowed. "I'm not at liberty to discuss specifics, sir, but no, nothing like that, just gone." He eyed me again, a hint of suspicion now hardening his features. "I should probably leave, sir, we have it handled." I nodded slowly, my gaze sweeping past him toward the gaping maw of the cargo plane. My eyes, however, were drawn to something else, something just beyond the official vehicles, near the plane's rear landing gear, too small for a tool, too distinct for mere debris. Ignoring the officer's thinly veiled dismissal, I skirted the edge of the taped-off area, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. The officer called out, but I pretended not to hear, my focus locked on that tiny, incongruous detail. As I drew closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a single, meticulously folded paper crane, fashioned from a glossy, deep crimson paper. My breath hitched again, this time a sharp, involuntary gasp. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. No, the same exacting folds, the same vibrant, almost aggressive shade of red. It was a detail so specific, so utterly unique to him, that it slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. I knelt, my knees protesting the sudden movement, and reached out a trembling hand. The patrol officer's voice, now sharper, closer, cut through the sudden roar in my ears. "Hey," I said, "stay back." But I ignored him, my fingers hovering just above the delicate paper bird. This wasn't just a heist. This was a message, and it was meant for me. A wave of nausea washed over me. The old doubts, like vultures, began to circle. They was I seeing ghosts where there were none. They was my haunted mind conjuring connections that didn't exist, desperate to redeem a past failure. The logical part of me screamed coincidence, a cruel twist of fate. My hand closed around the crane, its fragile paper surprisingly resilient. The officer reached me, his hand clamping down on my shoulder. "Cole, you need to step away from the evidence." "Evidence?" I rasped, my voice hoarse. I turned to face him, the red crane clutched tight in my palm. "This isn't just evidence, kid. This is a promise." His eyes, wide with confusion and a touch of fear, darted from the crane to my face, then back to the plane. He couldn't see it. Not yet, he was back. The hunt I had never truly escaped. The wind, a ghost with an icy breath, swept across the abandoned runway, rattling the loose sheet metal of the forgotten hangars. It howled a dirge around the skeletal remains of the cargo plane on abandoned runway, a behemoth of corroded aluminum and shattered dreams. My colleague, a young uniform with eyes still too bright for this world, stood beside me, his gaze fixed on the breached fuselage, then on my face, searching for an explanation I could not yet articulate. He saw a heist, a professional job, a cold crime. I saw a ghost, a shadow reaching from the sepulcher of my past. "Cole," he ventured, his voice thin against the wind's lament. "What is it?" "I look like I've seen," he trailed off, perhaps sensing the precipice of a forbidden comparison. I didn't answer. The meticulous precision of the entry point, the surgically clean cuts on the reinforced cargo bay door, the almost artistic way the locking mechanisms had been bypassed, they were not merely efficient. They were familiar. No one in, no one out, and I mean no one asterisk. The young uniform hesitated. The detective on scene already has a team. They're processing a robbery. I cut him off, turning to face him fully, my gaze pinning him. "I'm telling you, this is more, trust me." He swallowed, the uncertainty warring with his training. My reputation, or what was left of it, must have weighed heavily. He nodded slowly, then turned, his stride picking up as he barked orders into his radio, his back to me. Good. He would keep the official lines busy. I walked toward the gaping maw of the cargo plane on abandoned runway, each step a descent into a memory I had walled off with brick and mortar and the bitter dust of failure. Crates, once tightly secured, lay scattered like dismembered toys. The air, thick with the scent of aviation fuel and something metallic, something vaguely like ozone, tasted of rust and distant regret. My eyes scanned the scene, not for what was missing, but for what was present in the chaos. The official teams would catalog the stolen goods, the points of entry, the obvious signs of force. The method. A discarded length of heavy-duty strapping caught my eye. It lay near a toppled crate, a mundane detail amidst the wreckage. But it wasn't the strap itself. It was the way it had been severed. Not torn, not frayed by a blunt instrument, but sliced with an unnerving exactitude. A clean, diagonal cut, almost surgical, leaving no ragged edges, no struggle marks. It was the same cut I had seen 11 years ago on the restraints of the victims, on the tethers securing the objects of that other monster's macabre art. It was a signature, unmistakable. He was back. The thought, a venomous serpent, coiled in my gut. And with it, a surge of adrenaline, sharp and bitter. A gruff voice broke the spell. "Cole, what are you doing here?" I straightened, turning to face the detective, a man whose face was a roadmap of cynical lines and exhaustion. He was a good man but pragmatic, burdened by the endless parade of human depravity. He saw patterns, not ghosts. "Just looking," I said, my voice carefully neutral. He scoffed, adjusting his cap. "Looking for what? Your old badge. This is a professional job. Coal, high-value cargo, well executed, not your usual fare." The unspoken accusation hung in the air, not my kind of messy personal horror. He knew my history, the case that had broken me. "Meticulous," I corrected, my gaze unwavering. "Too meticulous, perhaps." "There's no such thing as too meticulous when you're stealing millions," the detective retorted, waving a hand dismissively. "Go home, Cole. Let the professionals handle it." He walked past me, heading deeper into the fuselage, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. It seemed out of place, too small to be cargo, too significant to be debris. I moved towards it, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. My fingers, trembling slightly, reached into the dust and grime. It was a locket, tarnished silver, intricately engraved with a delicate, almost forgotten floral pattern. My breath hitched. I knew this locket. I had seen it once, in a faded photograph clutched in the hand of a young woman. The last victim of the previous killer, the one I had failed to save. Eleanor Vance. This wasn't just a clue, it was a gauntlet thrown, a personal challenge. This wasn't a random theft. It was a message directly for me. The meticulous nature of the heist, the signature cut on the strap, and now this. It couldn't be coincidence. The killer was not just repeating his methods, he was taunting me, inviting me back into his twisted game. He knew I would recognize it. I clenched the locket in my palm, its cold metal pressing into my skin. The detective was right. This wasn't my usual fare anymore. But it was no longer just a crime scene. It was a personal vendetta. My gaze swept over the cargo plane on abandoned runway again, now seeing it through a new, terrifying lens. The heist had been perfectly executed, yes, but they had left something behind. A small, high-value crate still secured, still gleaming amongst the wreckage, its contents untouched. It was a strange oversight for such a precise operation. Why leave it? Was it a mistake, or was its very presence another deliberate message? A piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit the narrative of a simple, high-stakes theft. "Wait," I murmured aloud, the word catching on the wind. "That doesn't add up. If the goal was profit, why leave anything of value? Unless the value wasn't in the taking, but in the leaving. Or perhaps in the message it conveyed by its omission. This wasn't just about catching a ghost. It was about protecting whatever or whoever he was coming for next. And I, Cole, the man who had let him slip away once, would not make that mistake again. The game had begun anew, and I was, against my better judgment, irrevocably in it. My colleague, a young uniformed officer, shivered beside me, pulling his collar tighter against the relentless chill. "Nothing here, Cole," he mumbled, his voice thin against the wind's roar. "Just an empty shell." I didn't answer, my gaze tracing the faint, almost imperceptible scuff marks on the concrete. The fuselage, a maw of rusted metal, seemed to swallow the light. This place, a monument to forgotten ambition, now housed the ghost of a meticulous crime. The second heist. Just like the first, the target was high value, the execution flawless, and the method a whisper from a nightmare I thought I'd buried. "Look closer," I urged, my voice raspy, a stranger's sound in my own throat. I knelt, fingers brushing the gritty ground. They left a message. My colleague crouched reluctantly, his eyes scanning the vast, desolate space. "A message? I don't see anything." "Not for you," I muttered, my eyes fixed on a section of the plane's interior fuselage. A small, almost invisible scorch mark, no bigger than a thumbnail. It was precisely where the first mark had been found a year ago. A year, a lifetime. It wasn't a random act of vandalism. It was a signature burned into the metal, a subtle declaration of presence. The killer from my past, he was back, or someone was playing a very cruel, very elaborate game. The old case files, brittle with age and failure, screamed in my memory. The meticulous planning, the surgical precision, the utter lack of forensic evidence, and that mark. A tiny, almost insignificant detail that only I had ever truly focused on, dismissed by others as incidental damage. Now it was a brand seared onto my consciousness. "It's too clean," my colleague observed, his breath pluming white. "Almost theatrical, like they wanted us to know they were here but not how they did it." "Exactly," I said, rising slowly, the stiffness in my knees a mirror of the stiffness in my soul. "They want us to know, that's the point." My mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The first heist, a collection of rare gemstones from a private vault. The second, a cache of historical documents from a secure archive. Both audacious, both executed without a trace save for that mark. What was the connection beyond the method? What was the true prize? The wind howled louder, seeming to mock my certainty. "It's just a coincidence." "The methods are similar, yes, but coincidence?" I scoffed, the word a bitter taste. "When has anything truly important ever been a coincidence?" I walked towards the dilapidated hangar, its corrugated iron groaning under the wind's assault. I had failed to catch him before, the ghost in the machine, and now he was dancing on my grave. Later, huddled in the cramped confines of my apartment, the scent of stale coffee and old paper clinging to the air, I spread out the photographs. The first heist. The second. The scorch marks, enlarged, pixelated, but undeniably identical. My gaze drifted to the crumpled newspaper clippings, yellowed with time. That was what they called him. The man who stole not just valuables, but peace. The man who stole my career. My fingers traced the faded headlines. The old case, a knot in my gut, tightened. I remembered the faces of the victims, not those directly harmed in the heists, but the families of those whose security had been breached, whose lives had been subtly, irrevocably altered by the violations. The heists were never just about the loot, they were about the control, the statement. A sudden sharp ring shattered the quiet of the room. My phone. My heart, a dull drumbeat moments before, hammered against my ribs. It was an officer I recognized from the district precinct, a man who usually avoided my calls. Another one just came in. The National Art Gallery. My grip tightened around the phone. The National Art Gallery. Not just high value, but iconic. A symbolic target. This wasn't merely an escalation of ambition. It was a brazen challenge. I arrived at the gallery in a haze of flashing blue lights and urgent voices. The scene was chaotic, a stark contrast to the desolate calm of the cargo plane on abandoned runway. Uniformed officers cordoned off the grand entrance, their faces grim. A senior detective, a woman with eyes like chipped ice and a reputation for ruthless efficiency, stood near the shattered display case, directing the frantic activity. He saw me approach and his jaw tightened. "Cole," he stated, his voice devoid of warmth, a warning in its tone. "Fancy meeting I hear again." "Just passing by," I mumbled, the lie tasting like ash. My eyes, however, were already sweeping the scene. The shattered glass of the display case, housing the priceless star of Elysium diamond, glittered like malevolent shards, but the diamond was gone. No alarms triggered. No witnesses. It's almost as if you knew. Her gaze was accusatory, probing, unwelcome attention indeed. "Cole, that case was closed. I was retired from that case. This is a professional operation, yes, but it's not some boogeyman from my past." But it was. I could feel it in my bones. My eyes fell on the pedestal where the diamond had rested. There, almost hidden by a stray shard of glass, was the mark, identical. A fresh scorch, a tiny defiant burn against the polished marble. No forced entry, no alarms tripped. A junior officer reported to the detective, his voice strained. "It's like they just walked in." "They did," I murmured almost to myself. "They always do." The detective glared at me, him suspicion palpable. "Stay out of my way, Cole. This isn't my jurisdiction anymore." I ignored her, my focus entirely on the scene. The precision, the audaciousness, it was all there, but something felt different. The mark, while identical, seemed a fraction deeper, more pronounced. A subtle shift in the signature, perhaps, or was it a deliberate overemphasis? A weight that doesn't add up moment, nagging at the edges of my certainty. If the killer was so meticulous, why would a detail like that change? Was he evolving, or was someone else trying too hard to imitate him? The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through me. This wasn't just a copycat. This was something far more intricate, far more dangerous. The precise indentation, that meticulous carving in the polished obsidian, continued to prickle at the edges of my perception. A ghost of a memory, a flicker of doubt. The mark, identical in its cruel geometry to the ones that haunted my sleep, yet a fraction deeper, a line more pronounced. An intentional flourish or the tremor of a different hand. My mind, a reluctant archaeologist of trauma, sifted through the dust of years. Was I projecting, seeing the specter of my failure in every shadow, or was this subtle shift a deliberate taunt, a whisper across the chasm of time? I ignored the insistent hum of the city beyond my window, the rhythmic thrum of my own pulse. My apartment, a repository of forgotten cases and simmering regret, offered little comfort. My fingers, stained with old coffee and the phantom grit of crime scenes, traced the cold glass of my monitor. Spread across the screen were the profiles of the latest victims, or rather, the latest targets. A collector of rare manuscripts, his vault emptied of a single, unremarkable medieval text. A shipping magnate whose secure cargo container had yielded only a specific, antique navigational compass. And now, the gallery owner, stripped of an obscure pre-war landscape painting, its value negligible compared to the masterpieces it shared a wall with. On the surface, a scattershot of high-value items, each disappearance a testament to unnerving precision. But my gut, that scarred oracle, spoke of a different currency. I felt it in the hollow ache behind my eyes, the way my breath hitched on the stale air. This wasn't simple greed. No common thief would bypass a diamond-encrusted Fabergé egg for a faded map, or leave a Rembrandt untouched for a minor landscape. This was a narrative unfolding in stolen fragments. Days bled into a feverish blur. I pieced together the fragments, not of what was taken, but of who they were taken from. Each target, a thread in a tapestry I couldn't yet discern. Then a cryptic message, slipped under my door by an unknown hand, its paper thick and faintly perfumed with the scent of aviation fuel. A single coordinate. It led me to the edge of the city, where the urban sprawl dissolved into a desolate expanse of scrubland and abandoned infrastructure. Rust-eaten hangars loomed like skeletal giants against the bruised sky. And there, isolated on a cracked concrete ribbon that once served as a forgotten airstrip, sat a massive, hulking shape, the cargo plane on abandoned runway. Its metal skin was a patchwork of grime and fading paint, a ghost of its former purpose. The ramp, lowered like a gaping maw, invited me into its cavernous belly. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating nothing but emptiness. I expected crates, perhaps the remnants of a transfer, a discarded manifest. But there was nothing. I walked the length of the cargo bay, my hand brushing against the corrugated walls, the metal groaning under the weight of my touch. And then I saw it, not on the floor nor tucked into a corner. It was painted directly onto the interior wall, a stark, unsettling mural. It was a timeline, not with dates but with symbols. Each symbol, meticulously rendered, represented one of the recent heists. The collector of manuscripts was a coiled serpent. The shipping magnate, a fractured compass rose. The gallery owner, weeping eye. And connecting them all, a faint, almost invisible line leading to a central, larger symbol. A stylized, thorny crown etched with that same peculiar mark, the one that had been a fraction deeper, more pronounced. My breath caught. The thorny crown. My blood, usually a slow river, surged with an icy current. The images flashed, unbidden, from the deepest vault of my memory. The previous case, the killer who had eluded me, whose victims had been found with similar, albeit less intricate, symbols carved into objects left near their bodies. Each a silent condemnation, a twisted judgment. But the crown. It was a detail I had overlooked, dismissed as artistic flourish in the original case, a mere decorative element on a victim's antique locket. Now it screamed. The heists weren't about the objects themselves. They were about the symbolism of the objects and the message they, combined with the targets, were meant to convey. The medieval text, the compass, the painting, they weren't just valuable, they were meaningful to the targets, representations of their life's work, their passions, their hidden truths. And the thorny crown, that was the killer's signature, a recurring motif in the periphery of my past failure, now brought into terrifying, undeniable focus. Had I been so blind, so consumed by my own grief and shame that I missed the pattern, the true pattern, years ago? My fingers trembled as I pulled out my phone, snapping a picture of the mural. The air in the cargo plane on abandoned runway grew heavy, charged with a terrifying clarity. This wasn't just a series of heists. This was a reawakening. The killer was back, and this time they weren't just taking lives. They were taking pieces of history, weaving a tapestry of judgment, all leading back to a past I desperately wished to forget. An imperfect echo, a deliberate distortion. That subtle shift had been a burr beneath my skin, propelling me through the city's gray arteries, chasing a whisper of an old name, a shadow from the periphery of a decade-old horror. My borrowed sedan, a sputtering relic, coughed its last as I cut the engine, the sudden silence heavy as a shroud. Ahead, hulking against the bruised twilight, sat the cargo plane on abandoned runway. Its metallic skin, once gleaming, was now a patchwork of rust and grime, a grounded titan left to decay. The air tasted of industrial decay and the faint, acrid tang of jet fuel. A cold, flat wind scoured the desolate tarmac, rattling loose sheets of metal on nearby derelict hangars. The old muscle memory was a comfort, a ghost limb that still knew its purpose. The cargo plane's ramp was partially lowered, a gaping maw inviting me into its cavernous belly. The air inside was still, heavy with the scent of stale fuel and something else. Something metallic, almost coppery. I knew I'd come, Cole. The voice, a low rasp, sliced through the quiet. It belonged to the operative, a man whose face I'd seen in grainy surveillance photos from the periphery of the original investigation, a ghost of an accomplice I'd never quite managed to pin down. His hands were empty, held loosely at his sides. They're not perfect. What changed? The operative chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Change is inevitable, Cole. Even perfection can be. It was a tool, exquisitely crafted, its tip ending in a familiar, cruel geometry. But as he turned it slightly, catching the light, I saw the subtle difference. The cutting edge was minutely thicker, designed to leave that fraction deeper, a line more pronounced, perfecting it or trying to. An homage, perhaps, the operative mused, rotating the tool with an almost reverent air. A tribute to a master, but even masters can be surpassed, can't they? Especially by those who learn from their mistakes. He paused, his gaze boring into mine. Like yours, Cole, the one that got away, the one that broke you. A sharp, visceral anger flared within me, hot and swift. The words were a calculated jab striking at the very core of my failure. He knew. He knew about the original killer, about my inability to close that case, about the chasm it had left in my life. This wasn't just a random copycat. This was someone intimately connected, someone who understood the nuances of the original horror. I flatter me. A searing pain blossomed in my shoulder, knocking me off balance, sending my head slamming against a metal beam. The impact jarred my teeth, a bell ringing in my skull. I tasted blood. My vision blurred, spots dancing before my eyes. I barely registered the glint of metal before a heavy blow connected with my ribs, sending a shockwave of agony through my side. I gasped, struggling for air, the air thick with the smell of my own fear and the metallic tang of fresh injury. He knelt, not to help, but to retrieve something from my belt, the small, encrypted data chip I'd been carrying, containing the sparse leads I'd gathered. He held it up, a triumphant glint in his eyes. "Pity," he murmured, his voice now devoid of its earlier theatricality, flat and dismissive. "You were almost close, but some things are meant to remain unsolved, aren't they, Cole? Some demons." A small, irreparable shatter. My heart plummeted, all my recent efforts gone. The hulking figure grabbed me, hoisting me roughly to my feet, my shoulders screaming in protest. I tried to lash out, but my limbs felt heavy, sluggish, my head still swimming. Another sharp blow, this one to the back of my head, sent me sprawling. The world tilted, the swinging work light above becoming a dizzying, indistinct blur. "Leave him," the operative commanded, his voice fading as if from a great distance. "Let him think. Let him hurt. It makes the next act all the sweeter." I heard footsteps retreating, the heavy thud of the cargo plane's ramp grinding shut. My shoulder throbbed, a relentless drumbeat of pain, and my ribs felt like shattered glass. I was alone in the belly of the abandoned plane, stripped of my leads, physically battered, and facing a truth far more sinister than a mere copycat. This was a deliberate escalation, a twisted continuation, orchestrated by someone who knew my weaknesses, someone who understood the original killer's artistry and intended to surpass it. The fraction deeper mark wasn't just an error, it was a declaration. Had I misread everything? There was I, the disgraced detective, truly capable of stopping this new wave. The darkness was a living thing, a hungry maw that had swallowed the last sliver of light, leaving me adrift in a sea of absolute nothingness. My breath hitched, tasting of copper and the metallic tang of fear. The cargo plane's ramp, a monstrous iron jaw, had sealed shut, its groan still echoing in the hollow space around me. My shoulder screamed, 1,000 tiny shards grinding against bone, and my ribs felt like a cage of splintered glass, each breath a fresh torture. Each movement sent a fresh wave of agony through my side, a cruel reminder of the stranger's brutal efficiency. Time became a murky river, flowing without current. I dragged myself forward, one agonizing inch after another, my good hand mapping the contours of my prison. My mind, usually a sharp blade, was dulled by pain, but a flicker of instinct remained, a stubborn ember in the encroaching frost. This wasn't just a container, it was a specific kind of transport designed for specific cargo, rope, and then a metal drum. I remembered the cargo from earlier, the crude wooden crates, the stacked barrels. They weren't just random goods, they were ingredients. For what I couldn't say, but the pattern was there, a ghost of an idea trying to surface through the pain. I felt along the wall, searching for a latch, a handle, an emergency release. My heart hammered against my fractured ribs, a frantic bird trapped in its broken cage. I had to fight it. I had to live. Not just for myself, but for the victims I'd failed, for the promise of justice that still felt like a raw, open wound. A handle. It was stiff, rusted, refusing to yield. I braced my good shoulder against the wall, gritting my teeth against the fire in my side, and pulled. My muscles screamed, but I pulled harder, pouring every ounce of desperate strength into the effort. With a groan that mimicked the cargo plane's earlier complaint, the latch gave way, a sharp click echoing in the confined space. A sliver of gray light, tentative and fragile, pierced the absolute black. It was a narrow service hatch, tucked away near the rear of the hold, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. I pushed, clawed, wriggled, ignoring the fresh tears in my flesh as I scraped past the sharp edges. The world was not silent. A biting wind whipped around me, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant asphalt. Above, a sky the color of bruised plums bled into a sickly yellow horizon, hinting at a sunrise I hadn't thought I'd live to see. I lay sprawled on the cracked tarmac of an abandoned runway, the enormous, silent silhouette of the cargo plane looming over me like a predator. I pushed myself up, every muscle protesting, my vision swimming. The runway stretched out, a desolate ribbon of gray, flanked by overgrown grass and skeletal trees. No other vehicles. No buildings in sight save for a crumbling, distant structure that might have once been a control tower. Utter isolation. They had wanted me to vanish without a trace. The heists, the specific targets, the meticulous planning. It wasn't about the money, not truly. It was about the items they stole. Not rare jewels or stacks of cash, but things of symbolic value, things that resonated with the past, the old case. The serial killer I'd failed to catch. His victims had been chosen for their professions, for their roles in society, not their wealth. The stolen schematics from the architect's office, the pharmaceutical formulas from the research facility, the specific antique tools from the museum heist, they weren't just random acts of theft. They were a collection, a reconstruction. He hadn't just murdered, he had crafted a narrative with each body. And I, Cole, had been too slow to read it. Now, someone was continuing that narrative, completing the collection, but why and why now? My gaze fell upon a discarded fuel canister near the plane's landing gear, its label half peeled. A specific brand, one I vaguely remembered from an old evidence locker, and then it clicked. The architect had designed the building where the first victim was found. The pharmaceutical formulas related to a rare sedative used in the original killer's method, the antique tools. They matched the implements found in the killer's abandoned workshop years ago. It wasn't a copycat. It was too precise, too intimate with the details. This was someone who knew the old killer's mind, his process, his unfinished work. Not the killer himself, he was long dead, or so I'd believed, but someone who had been deeply affected by his crimes. Someone who had been an observer, a student. My breath caught in my throat. It couldn't be. Not them. The detective, the one who had worked the original case with me, had been obsessed, driven. After I was disgraced, after the killer vanished, they had continued to chase ghosts, convinced I had missed something vital. Their theories, once dismissed as obsessive ramblings, now echoed in my mind with terrifying clarity. It wasn't about reenacting the past, it was about completing it. About finishing the killer's grand design, a twisted tribute. And the heists were merely the collection of components for the final act. A sick wave of nausea washed over me. The perpetrator wasn't just continuing the work. They were doing it to expose my failure, to prove that I had been blind. The ultimate humiliation, the ultimate revenge. My mind reeled. The detective. All those late nights, all those shared frustrations, all those details we'd sifted through together. Had they been building this piece by agonizing piece for years? My self-doubt gnawed at me. The thought was a bitter poison, but the pieces fit too perfectly now, a macabre mosaic of stolen items, a twisted homage. The cargo plane, the isolated runway, the specific items, they were all part of a larger, terrifying ritual. And I was meant to be the final sacrifice, a broken witness to the completion of a masterpiece of malice. The pain in my shoulder and my ribs was a dull throb now, overshadowed by the stark clarity of this new, horrifying truth. And I had to stop them, before their bloody symphony reached its final, devastating crescendo. A sick wave of nausea washed over me, a bitter taste rising in my throat as the pieces locked into place. The heists were not random acts of defiance. They were a scavenger hunt for a twisted architect. Each stolen artifact a necessary component for a final, grotesque tableau. The rising sun, once a promise of clarity, now felt like a spotlight on my own failures, illuminating the path I had missed years ago. My hands, still trembling slightly from the night's frantic pace, clenched into fists. This wasn't just about stopping a killer. It was about dismantling a tribute built on my own unresolved past. My phone, a dead weight in my pocket, vibrated with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, the static hum of my thoughts momentarily silenced. A premonition, cold and sharp, pierced through the lingering fatigue. I answered, my voice rough. The last piece, your ghost. The line went dead, my breath hitched. My ghost. The words echoed, a cruel taunt. The runway. It had to be the abandoned strip miles out, a forgotten scar on the Earth's periphery. This was no longer a puzzle I was observing from a distance. It was a gauntlet thrown directly at my feet. The perpetrator knew I was watching, knew I was close enough to understand their language. And now, they were drawing me into their final act, making me a player in their macabre theater. The informant. My mind raced back to the old case, the one that had shattered my career and left me with a permanent ache behind my ribs. My ghost. This wasn't just a threat, it was a direct challenge to my deepest regret. I grabbed my worn leather jacket, the familiar weight a small comfort, and bolted for the battered sedan. The engine coughed, then roared to life, a testament to its stubborn endurance. The road unwound before me, a ribbon of asphalt stretching towards the horizon, each mile an agonizing crawl. My thoughts were a maelstrom of regret and frantic calculations. Had the informant been alive all this time, a silent witness to the unfolding horror, waiting for this moment? Or had they been a pawn, manipulated and hidden, only to be revealed now as the final, most personal component of the killer's twisted collection. The sun climbed higher, bathing the landscape in a harsh, unforgiving light. Fields blurred into an indistinguishable green, then gave way to industrial complexes, skeletal structures against the pale sky. Finally, the terrain flattened, becoming desolate, punctuated by overgrown weeds and the skeletal remains of forgotten machinery. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The car bounced over potholes, rattling my teeth, but I barely registered the discomfort. My gaze was fixed on the runway, on the faint outline of a structure at its far end. A cargo plane. The words of the digital voice resonated. The runway. The last piece. I pulled the sedan off the crumbling asphalt service road, sending up a plume of dust that briefly obscured my view. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drummer announcing my arrival. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of dried earth and an unspoken menace. The cargo plane sat motionless, a colossal metal beast slumbering under the indifferent sky. Its paint was faded, scarred by years of exposure, its windows opaque with grime. A ramp, partially lowered, gaped open like a hungry maw. Inside, the air was stagnant, tasting of dust and stale fuel. Shafts of sunlight slicing through grimy portholes, illuminated motes dancing in the gloom. The vast interior was mostly empty, but in the center, a single crude setup. A folding table, a few tools scattered around, and a large, oddly shaped crate. My eyes, however, were drawn to something else. Strapped to a metal frame, slumped and unconscious, was a figure. A man. It was him, the man I had believed dead, whose disappearance had haunted my waking hours and invaded my dreams. A note was pinned to his tattered shirt, a single, elegant script. My name, Cole, and beneath it a single phrase, the missing testimony. My mind reeled, the missing testimony. The original case had hinged on a key witness who vanished, leaving a gaping hole in the prosecution. The chief had blamed me for their disappearance, for the collapse of the case. But the informant had been more than just a snitch. He had been the witness, and he was alive. And now here, presented to me like a final, gruesome exhibit. A metallic clang echoed from the rear of the plane, startling me. I spun, weapon raised, my senses screaming. My breath caught. They were here, or had just been here. I moved with silent urgency, my feet crunching on loose debris. The back of the cargo hold was a maze of forgotten crates, draped in cobwebs. I pushed past a stack of empty barrels, my eyes scanning for movement, for any sign. Nothing. Then I saw it. On the floor, nestled in a thin film of dust, a small, intricate device. It was a miniature recording unit no bigger than my thumb, its indicator light a faint, pulsing red. It wasn't just a threat. It was a message broadcast directly to me. A live feed. Had this entire scene, my arrival, my reaction, been observed? My gaze snapped back to the informant, still unconscious. He was the missing testimony, not just a piece of the puzzle, but the very voice that could unravel the original crime and, by extension, the current one. The killer wasn't merely collecting components for a tribute. They were orchestrating a theatrical reveal, dragging my past failures into the present, forcing me to confront them. The ultimate act of humiliation, or perhaps a twisted form of redemption. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from the searing heat of a renewed purpose, mixed with a profound, bitter shame. The informant alive, the truth within reach. But the perpetrator was always one step ahead, always manipulating, always watching. The game had just become excruciatingly personal. My own doubt, a familiar viper, coiled in my gut. Had I, in my blind pursuit, become just another component in their twisted play? The chief's accusation, a phantom limb ache I'd carried for years, had suddenly found its anchor. Not just a failure of my watch, but a deliberate erasure. The informant, the witness, a ghost whose silence had condemned me more thoroughly than any jury ever could. The realization ignited a cold fire in my gut, sharper than any whiskey burn. My hands, usually restless, were steady as I traced the faded lines of the original case file, spread across the warped surface of my kitchen table. The heists, each a meticulously crafted echo, spoke of an architect, not merely a mimic. And the architect, I now understood, had a personal stake in the narrative. They weren't just stealing valuables, they were rewriting history piece by stolen piece. The key was the cargo plane. The last heist, the one that had finally drawn me in, hadn't been about the jewels. It was about the manifest, a single, unassuming crate listed for international transit. I'd seen the photo, a blurry image from the scene, and dismissed it as a red herring. Now it screamed. It wasn't about what was in the crate, it was about the crate itself, its destination, its symbolism, a final flight, just like the witness was meant to take. I called the detective assigned to the current cases. His voice, edged with suspicion, was a familiar sting. "Cole," he began, a sigh heavy with resignation. "What is it now?" "The last target," I stated, my voice flat, devoid of the usual pleas. "The transport company. They had a scheduled departure for a cargo plane on an abandoned runway outside the city limits. I know the architect. They're not just taking, they're moving. They're closing loops. And that plane, that runway, it's the final loop." I could almost feel his skepticism hardening, a wall between us. It's the only place they can complete the last phase without drawing too much attention. An isolated departure point for something significant. Significant, Cole, or just another empty theory from a man who sees ghosts. They're real ghosts, detective, and this time they're leaving tracks. We need to set a trap. Use the manifest, the original manifest for that flight. There was a specific item listed as confidential archive, small, easily overlooked, but crucial. I can watch. I can bring my entire unit if I want, but the trap, it has to be mine. It has to be our ghost. It took hours of relentless persuasion, a desperate dance between my faded authority and his burgeoning unease. He agreed finally, his voice laced with the warning of immediate arrest if I stepped out of line. I was a loose cannon, a liability, but perhaps, just perhaps, a necessary evil. The wind, a raw blade, tore at my coat as I stepped onto the desolate expanse of the abandoned runway. The sky above was a bruised canvas, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and disuse. Before me, hulking and skeletal, sat the cargo plane, a forgotten leviathan. This was where the witness was meant to disappear. This was where the perpetrator would try to make their final disappearance. I had arranged for a single crate, meticulously crafted to mimic the one on the original manifest, to be loaded into the cavernous belly of the plane. Inside, not the original confidential archive that was long gone, probably incinerated, but a replica. A dummy, but one imbued with enough symbolic weight, enough historical resonance to lure the architect. I had packed it with old blank case files, sealed with a replica of the chief's personal wax seal, a detail that only someone intimately familiar with the original investigation would recognize. It was a taunt, a challenge. As I secured the crate, my gloved fingers brushing against the cold metal, a thought pricked at me. This wasn't just about making the witness disappear. It was about making something disappear. The heists weren't just about obtaining items. They were about securing them, consolidating them, perhaps even destroying them. The confidential archive wasn't just a document. It was a key to the past, a lock to the future. My breath plumed in the frigid air as I scanned the vast, empty space. The detective and his team would be positioned discreetly, hidden among the skeletal remains of old hangars and overgrown brush. I was the visible lure. My presence here, a disgraced former detective hovering around a staged operation, was meant to be part of the provocation. I had chosen this location not just for its isolation, but for its echoes. The loneliness, the sense of abandonment, it felt like a mirror to my own soul. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a glint from the distant perimeter fence. Too far to identify, but enough to tighten the knot in my stomach. They're here, or at least their eyes were. I moved to the plane's loading ramp, a solitary figure against the fading light. The internal thoughts gnawed at me. Was I wrong? Had I misread the pattern, fallen prey to my own desperate need for resolution? The architect was cunning, meticulous. What if this was their trap for me? What if they knew I would connect the dots and were now waiting for me to walk into their meticulously laid snare? I doubted myself, not for the first time, but with a renewed intensity. The stakes felt impossibly high. I positioned myself by the cargo door, a silent sentinel. The air grew heavier, pregnant with anticipation. The trap was set. Now we waited for the architect to step into the spotlight of their own making, or for me to walk into theirs. The wind, a relentless phantom, whipped across the desolate expanse, clawing at my coat, whispering forgotten names in my ears. The distant city lights were a sickly, shimmering bruise against the bruised violet sky. My breath plumed in the frigid air, each exhalation a desperate prayer for clarity, for strength. The detective's words still echoed, a grating reminder of my precarious standing, yet I pressed on, a moth drawn to a destructive flame. The hulking silhouette of the cargo plane on abandoned runway loomed before me, a skeletal beast crouched in the gloom. Its metal skin glinted under the sparse, stuttering floodlights, reflecting nothing but the vast emptiness that stretched around us. No sirens wailed, no flashing lights painted the tarmac. This was my theater, my reckoning, unburdened by official interference for now. My hand found the cold grip of the sidearm tucked into my waistband. It felt heavier than usual, a leaden anchor to a past I couldn't outrun. Every muscle in my body was a taut wire, humming with a frantic energy. There was nothing, only the howl of the wind and the distant hum of the plane's own dormant machinery. The air inside was still, heavy with the scent of old fuel, dust, and something else. A faint metallic tang that prickled at the back of my throat. I stepped inside, my boots echoing on the corrugated metal floor, the sound swallowed by the cavernous interior. It was a voice I knew, a voice that had haunted my nightmares for years, yet one I had never expected to hear directed at me in this manner. From behind a stack of industrial containers he emerged. He was simply there, ordinary, a man I had dismissed, overlooked years ago. A man whose face in that moment became a gallery of every single victim's last expression, twisted into a grotesque, knowing smile. My breath hitched. The blood in my veins felt like ice, then fire. I always were slow, weren't I? The killer remarked, his head tilted slightly, a casual cruelty in his gaze. Even then, the details were all there, Cole, the meticulousness, the artistry. I saw the chaos, but I missed the design. My mind reeled, the face, the voice, the casual dismissal. It was him. The one who had slipped through my fingers, leaving a trail of shattered lives and a crater of guilt in my own. The heists, the mirroring of methods, it wasn't just a copycat. It was a taunt, a grand, elaborate return. Why? The word was a rasp torn from my throat. My hand tightened on the sidearm, but I didn't raise it. Not yet. I needed to understand. I needed to hear it from him to shatter the ghost that had plagued me. He chuckled, a dry, rustling sound that grated on my nerves. Why? To finish what I started, to show Cole, that true brilliance is never truly extinguished. I thought I could bury me, didn't I, with my incompetence, my misplaced theories. He took a step closer, his eyes glinting. The heists were just a prelude, a way to announce my return. He hadn't just returned, he had planned this entire charade for me. He wanted me. The others I managed, my voice gaining a desperate edge. The ones who helped you with the heists, they knew. Oh, they knew nothing of the grander scheme. He waved a dismissive hand. Pawns, Cole, easily manipulated. They saw the money, the challenge. They never saw the true purpose, unlike you. His gaze sharpened, piercing. You see it now, don't you? The masterpiece, the ultimate hunt. He moved with an unsettling fluidity, circling me slowly like a predator assessing its prey. The cargo plane's interior, once a mere backdrop, now felt like a cage. My eyes darted, searching for an exit, a weapon, anything. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the ordinary man before me with the monster he truly was. How could I have missed it? All those years, the clues, the patterns, they were right there, staring me in the face, and I had been blind. A wave of self-loathing threatened to engulf me, but I forced it down. Not now, not here. You're obsessed with me, I accused, trying to find a chink in his calm facade. His smile widened, devoid of warmth. And you with me, Cole, we are intertwined, you and I, a dance of hunter and hunted. Only this time I lead. He lunged, not with a weapon, but with a sudden, unexpected ferocity. His hand shot out not for me, but for a heavy metal strut protruding from a stack of machinery. He ripped it free with surprising strength, the screech of protesting metal echoing through the plane. The strut became a crude, brutal club in his grasp. I reacted on instinct, dropping into a defensive crouch, the sidearm now leveled, but I hesitated. My finger hovered over the trigger. He wasn't armed with a gun. He wanted a fight, a personal one, a primal struggle. The first swing was aimed at my head, a blur of motion. I ducked, the air whistling past my ear as the strut connected with a crate behind me, splintering wood with a sickening crack. Shards flew, stinging my cheek. The metallic tang in the air intensified, mingling with the acrid scent of fear, my own fear. I fired a warning shot, aiming for the floor near his feet. The deafening report reverberated, momentarily stunning us both. He flinched but quickly recovered, his eyes blazing with a dangerous light. "You still hesitate, Cole, still afraid to pull the trigger?" He roared, lunging again, forcing me backwards. I scrambled back, my foot catching on a loose cable. I stumbled, falling hard against a stack of canvas-wrapped bundles. The impact jarred my teeth. He advanced, the strut held high, a grim reaper with a metal scythe. "Now, Cole," he hissed, "we can finally finish our game. No more rules, no more witnesses." My breath hitched. He was right. There was no one here but us. My mistake, my arrogance, my failure. The cargo plane on abandoned runway became a tomb, and I, the foolish explorer, had walked right in. But even in the suffocating grip of despair, a flicker of defiance ignited within me. He had planned this, yes, but he hadn't accounted for the fire that still burned in the ashes of a disgraced detective. This wasn't just about my past. It was about the present, about preventing a future where he continued his twisted game. I would not be his final victim. He had planned this, every solitary beat of my desperate pursuit, every phantom echo of the past, a grand, macabre symphony orchestrated for my ears alone. The low hum of the cargo plane on abandoned runway, usually a sound of departure, now sang of my final, desolate arrival. The air, thick with the scent of aviation fuel and old dust, pressed in, a shroud woven from my own regrets. I understand now, don't I, Cole? The voice, once a quiet murmur in my memory, now filled the vast emptiness, resonant with a chilling satisfaction. It belonged to the quiet observer, a figure I dismissed as peripheral during the original investigation, a shadow clinging to the edges of the victim's life. The pattern, the precision, the very art of it. I pushed myself up from the cold metal floor, my ribs aching, my pride a bruised thing, my eyes still adjusting to the dim, filtered light from the grimy portholes narrowed on his silhouette. He stood by a stack of crates, hands clasped, a picture of serene malice. "The art of destroying lives," I retorted, my voice hoarse but steadying. "The art of playing God." "No, Cole, the art of correction," he corrected, a faint smile playing on his lips. I saw the chaos. I saw the design. I saw a failure. I saw an opportunity to complete what was so haphazardly begun. He gestured around the cavernous interior, his movements deliberate, almost theatrical. "This isn't about money, not truly. The heists were merely the brushstrokes. The canvas was always you, my reputation." He hadn't just copied the old killer, he had been there. He had known the original killer, perhaps even admired him. "The first killer. I helped him, didn't I?" The words tasted like ash. My initial failure wasn't just my own, it was compounded by my blindness to this silent partner. He tilted his head, a gesture of mock contemplation. "Help, perhaps, or perhaps I simply observed. And when you, the great detective, fumbled and stumbled, leaving the grand design unfinished, I decided it was time to pick up the tools myself, to show the world what true precision looks like, to show you." His gaze locked onto mine, unwavering. "Remember the meticulous arrangement of the victims, the specific items taken, seemingly random. I called them trophies, I called them elements, each piece a part of a larger, unrevealed tableau." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "The original's passion was raw, unrefined. Mine is refined, polished. And I, Cole, I was destined to be the final, unwitting critic. A sudden jolt of memory pierced through the haze of despair. The original case, the victim's apartment. A small, anachronistic detail I dismissed as insignificant. A particular brand of imported tea, only found in a specialty shop across town. The quiet observer, then a colleague of the victim, had mentioned his own fondness for that very tea, a passing comment I'd logged away and forgotten. A thread, slender as spider silk, now pulling taut. "The tea," I murmured, my eyes scanning his face for a flicker of recognition. The Ceylon from the old import store. I was the only one who mentioned it back then. His smile faltered, a hairline crack in his composure. A triviality. "No," I countered, finding my footing not physically but mentally. "A habit, a tell. The original killer wasn't a connoisseur of fine tea, he was a brute, but I always had a taste for the finer things, didn't I? I didn't just observe him, I influenced him. I guided his hand, then let him take the fall, only to resurface when the stage was clear for my own performance." The quiet observer's eyes hardened, the mask of serenity slipping further. "A theory, Cole, and a desperate one at that. The heists weren't just about the methods," I pressed, my voice gaining strength. "They were about the narrative. Each one a public humiliation for the authority I resented. Each one a mirror reflecting my own past failures. I weren't just copying, I was mocking." A glint of something feral entered his eyes. "And if I was, I deserved it. I deserved to see my legacy crumble just as I let the original's masterpiece fade into obscurity. I am merely ensuring it is properly appreciated." He took a step towards me, his hand slipping into his jacket. My gaze dropped to his movement, my instincts screaming. This wasn't just a revelation, it was a prelude. "I've waited a long time for this, Cole," he said, his voice now devoid of its earlier calm, edged with a dangerous excitement. "To finish the narrative, to tie up all loose ends." My breath caught, but not in fear, in understanding. The cargo plane on abandoned runway wasn't just a tomb for my career. It was meant to be my final resting place. As his hand emerged, not with a weapon, but with a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a piece identical to one found at the first crime scene years ago, I knew. It wasn't about the physical threat, not yet. It was about the symbolic finality. He wanted me to witness his victory, to understand the depth of his triumph before he extinguished me. But I wasn't the broken man he thought I was. The despair, the self-doubt that had crippled me for years, had been burned away by the harsh light of his confession. My arrogance might have led me here, but my resolve, forged in the fires of my past mistakes, was all that remained. Right," I said, my voice low, steady. "It's time to finish this." And then I moved, not towards him, but towards the stack of crates, a calculated feint. The cargo plane on abandoned runway might have been his stage, but I wasn't just a character in his play anymore. I was the one who would write the ending. The sudden shift in my weight, the clatter of loose metal as I kicked at a crate's base, caught him off guard. The wooden bird, his cherished symbol, slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the floor as he stumbled, his carefully constructed composure finally shattering. The tension, stretched taut for years, snapped. This was not a quiet ending. This was a reckoning.